Everyone, and welcome back. Welcome to my another video, and it's getting a little interesting because we have covered this thing, and then 12-factor app. This is also covered. I mean, whatever the last set of videos we talked about, that is all 12-factor app and making your Express TypeScript a simple app production ready by introducing the logging, by introducing the PM2 process manager, by adding all the required things of having the 12-factor app, by splitting the configurations, config management, where you are actually managing the environment variables either using CI/CD pipelines. And then we also talked about how we can segregate these different stages, like the build, deployment, and the testing, all these different stages. And we talked about the GitHub actions, like how you can write a GitHub actions to build and deploy your application. Simply build, because currently we don't have any deployment platform. We are just doing a building and testing and installing. So we have done that. Now this is what we are going to talk about. So because the microservice you are going to write, you may choose Express TypeScript if you are good at it, because otherwise if I want to have a TypeScript flavor and I just wanted to go ahead with the NestJS, then what I will do is, first couple of videos I'm going to talk about a simple NestJS application. We already have this monorepo setup, so what we can do is we can start talking about this NestJS baseline. Okay, so in the NestJS we are going to talk about the basic fundamentals. Like, let's say you just know Express TypeScript, nothing else, but this is the right opportunity for you to learn the NestJS. I won't be teaching you the NestJS, but I may be providing the resources so you can take a look onto that. But yes, building your application or by building your services or microservices or the API platform using NestJS is really helpful, because it is providing you the opinionated approach where you can create a controller, services, factories, and middleware, pipes, all the custom logics you might have heard in the Angular, because it is using the modular approach. Angular is a front end, don't get scared, but it uses these Angular core libraries underneath to create the modules, to create the dependency injection, to create a separate services, then controller, then there is a middleware, then pipes, factories, interceptors, because it is providing you the structure. There is a module contains your controller, services, providers, middlewares, all those things. So it is giving you the fixed structure which each and every developer in your team can follow, and you can write the best code out of it. Okay, so that's what we are going to discuss in this, how we can baseline our NestJS application, and then we can build a simple auth application. Simple auth app to just give you the feeling, okay, this is how the NestJS building blocks really connects together. This is how you create a service, dependency inject that service inside a controller. Inside controller, this is how you define the APIs like HTTP GET, PUT, POST for the authentication. Then you might be integrating this thing with the database also. In the database, you are doing a reading and writing the data to the Postgres using TypeORM, SQLize, or maybe using Mongoose. Who knows? Okay, so that's what we are going to talk about in these two videos. Hi everyone, and welcome back. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and in this playlist we are covering the modern stack development. We already covered Node.js, Express, TypeScript, and now we are moving forward with the 4 new set of videos which will talk about building REST APIs using NestJS, building GraphQL APIs with the NestJS, and then gRPC, TRPC stuff. These are the 4 primary videos I will be covering in the next 4 videos. So the first one is all about NestJS. So NestJS, I'm expecting that you are not totally new to that. NestJS is the API framework, same as Express, and really very popular. So if you are really into backend and haven't explored NestJS, then first thing you should do is you should learn NestJS, and then I can help you to build a simple full stack application with the NestJS as an API backend, which can expose either REST API or the GraphQL APIs, and then you can have your front end running through the Next.js or React. So what I'm going to do is, this is what we are going to build. This is a purely simple NestJS API. So we are going to build a NestJS API platform that is just doing a simple CRUD operation. But here it talks about, okay, building all these NestJS modules, controller services, and DTOs. It's an end-to-end, the whole implementation. So I'm going to talk about each and everything with the minute details. So just follow along with me. I already have this content, so I will be just using the same content, but the content is same. Here we are going to use a monorepo, and we are going to create these packages in the just same folder structure. And then you will understand, okay, how to write a simple basic implementation in the NestJS. NestJS is actually API platform, and we will be using the monorepo and the workspace. So we are going to create a logger package, and all those packages will be used by NestJS application. So I don't cover like a basic hello world and all. I just cover the production ready things. Like here we have the complete PNPM workspace and the NX monorepo tool. And here we are creating these tiny packages which will be used by my NestJS application. So I'm going to cover all these things together, and then in the next video I'm going to build an authentication service using NestJS and all these things combined. So this is what we are covering, because we have already covered Express TypeScript. You already know how to build the APIs. Now you start exploring the NestJS world, how to build the APIs there. Once you are familiar, then we can build some custom implementation, like let's build a simple authentication service using NestJS. And then after that we will just talk about same services using GraphQL. Okay, so let's get started. We have created in the last video. This is the simple application we have created. Now in this video we are going to create some packages, so that those packages we can use in all the other demo applications which we are going to build, because all these demo applications are going to use database connections, configurations, or logger module, all these features. So instead of duplicating this particular code, what we can do, we can create these reusable packages here. Those packages we can use in all the demo applications which we are going to play in this. So this is actually a monorepo, and we are using nx on top of that monorepo tool. So this is the PNPM workspace, and we are using this monorepo tool nx, so that we can automate lots of things. And all these scripts are like cached when you do npm run build. All those things you can configure through nx.json. So this is like a baseline project we have created. Now it's time to create some packages and then start talking about some of the NestJS advanced features with the example applications. Like obviously we cannot talk about them theoretically. We need to do some hands-on to understand those advanced topics. Okay, so let's create packages. Here what we can do is we can create two packages. One is, let's say here we can create a app config or app database. So what we are going to do is, all our NestJS applications are going to have a database entities and all, and NestJS already provides this implementation using NestJS TypeORM. Like you can use NestJS TypeORM or any other different ORM solution. Here we will be focusing more on to the NestJS TypeORM to deal with the database. And NestJS config, it also provides its own implementation of a config module. We'll just create these two packages with our custom implementation, because here you are passing all the hard-coded values. We can use the config module. Config module will be injected, and we can initialize this database module dynamically using TypeORM module.forRootAsync. So here in the first module we are going to talk about dynamic module, and we can just do a simple implementation in the database package. So what we are trying to achieve here is, we already have a REST APIs, right? Now let's say if I want to implement NestJS TypeORM Postgres implementation for REST API development for the demo, I will be adding the NestJS TypeORM module. We'll be doing a TypeORM module.forRoot somewhere in the code, and I will be doing the same thing, replicating the same code everywhere in each and every different demo application. So instead of that, I can create this simple database, and we need to have a simple package JSON npm init that will give me a default package JSON. Okay, so here is app config. Now what we are planning to do, we are going to create a package that can be added as a dependency in my application. This is how these packages really works, and this is a PNPM workspace. So you create a package and add that dependency in your application. So here you can create all these reusable packages: config module, logger module, database module, SendGrid module, or Elasticsearch module. All these modules which can be created as a reusable package, and that can be added as a dependency to any of your application which we are going to use for the demo. Okay, so app config, app database. So what I will do is, I have already shown this demo implementation in my all last 3 or 4 full stack clone applications, but here again what we are going to do is we will just set up a simple package JSON. So here let's say app database. Here we are going to use nextjs TypeORM. So here it will be, what is the scope for the root package JSON? I think it's root. Here what we can do is, inside this, let's use this as a nextjs. Okay, we should not use nextjs because nextjs is external package scope. We can just use dev database. Okay, similarly there is another package we are going to create in the config. So config module, which is going to populate the process.env into our services, that is going to be done through the config module. So here also we are going to create a simple package JSON. That package JSON will be just providing us all the data. So here I will just create a package JSON, and here it is dev config. Let's see all the dependencies, what we need or not. Microservices we don't need. Config, code, testing, just like if you want to write some types, some test cases, then you can use it. So this is the config package, and here we can see our config and database package is available. Now we will add the rest of the configurations, tsconfig and justconfig, and the source folder, because these are like simple TypeScript packages. Now you are just going to create a NestJS module, that is different thing, but they should be able to compile their code. So there is a tsconfig and justconfig for the tests. This is a package JSON tsconfig, which is going to look for the source, and inside this we will be creating our module. So inside this we are going to create index.ts. Right, when you build this using tsconfig, we'll be using to build this, we already have a TypeScript dependency. So when you do npm run build, it will look for the source folder and it will create a build. This is how all the TypeScript based application works, right? You just have a tsconfig, TypeScript compiler configuration. When you do npm run build, it will use tsc to build the code and give us the build output. It's basic thing. I hope everybody knows about it. Index.ts, and here we are going to create a config module. What this config module is about, if you look into NestJS documentation, what this config module provides, it reads your .env file and put all those variables into process.env. Let's say I'm using Elasticsearch or database. There you need database username, password, port, host, port, right? So how your code will receive that? You need to pass a .env, right? .env, and either you can use a .env module which will read .env file, and that will put all the .env variable into process.env, and in your code you already referring the db host port using process.env.db host, process.env.db port, right? This is how you are able to access all the variables. So this is, either you can use existing module provided by NestJS, which is simple nextjs config, or we can write our simple tiny package which is also doing the same thing but in just a different way. So what it is doing is, here in the config module, We will define our interface config.default. Default.ts. Here we are going to create interface and config.default. So I'm using this package in mostly all my applications. So let's say what we are putting inside a config default. We can just say for authentication, Google Swagger we can keep, and database. These are the minimum variables I need for my application. DB host port, and now I will be creating config module and config service. These are NestJS service and NestJS module. Config.module.ts. Most of you guys, if you are following my videos, then you are already aware about this. You can skip this video. Here I'm just creating these two packages. Those packages I can use in my application. So config module and config service. Config module is config service is going to populate the config data. So I will just explain my config service and config module, how we are using it. So we just need to do npm install. Either we can do it at the root. So it will install all the dependencies which are available in the package JSON. Its config is not in the npm registry. Okay, we might be adding a dependency somewhere. Okay, I got it. So here in the database, I have a dependency added, which is it should be dev config. So these these packages are also dependent on one another. So if you see the database, this is the config package, and this config package is added in the database package. How we are adding the dependency? Just by adding the namespace dev config, and you can just specify the version name or just put a asterisk like this. That is also enough. It will add the config dependencies inside the database package. So we are talking about app config. Here we have some default interface, like these are all the variables we are using in the application. Google config, elastic config we don't need. I will remove the interfaces which we are not using in application. We are just using database configurations, host port, process environment variable, and Swagger credentials. Okay, and inside config service, we need to clean up things which we don't need. Okay, and you can see what this config looks like. This is just a simple ES6 service. What it is doing is it is putting all these things inside our this.config object, and what this config service is returning, this.config object. This.config equal to data, the default config data. Otherwise it is going to load from the environment variable. You need to call it, and what this method will do is it will put all your environment variable, this whole object, inside config, right? And here inside this module we are calling this load from config. This is like this is the way how we create a providers config factory, provide and use factory. Here we created the instance of the class load from env and returning the config. Okay, maybe if you are looking at this as an NestJS advanced video and you might not be able to understand this syntax, it's just a way of creating the providers in the NestJS. What we are doing is I'm creating this provider. This is a simple service, and inside a use factory I'm just returning this config object, and the config factory is a part of provider, so I'm passing it here. So this is my config module. So here inside my index.ts I can export all those things so that at other places we can use it. Config module, service, interface, and default, and we can build this module from here. Npm run build. What it is building? It is building this package using tsc. If it is built successfully, then we are good. Now we can add the database module, right? That is the next thing. And what the database module will do, here also we need to create all these dependencies. Here we already importing the config module. So what the database module will contain, here this is how we are creating the this is how we are creating the or registering the TypeORM module. So we are just creating a wrapper on top of TypeORM module, because this config module we are going to pass inside database module to initialize this database module dynamically, because we don't know what is the database host, port and all the configurations. We are going to inject the config service or config module in this module. So TypeORM module.forRoot can be done at runtime by passing the config service. Config service will contain all the database host, port. Might be we would be able to see it something here if it was talking about it. Looks like it is not talking about that thing. It's all about how we can initialize the database module dynamically, not by just passing. Okay, here it is. So this syntax, if you are able to understand this syntax right now, that is fine. Otherwise, I will be explaining this later. What this TypeORM module is. TypeORM module, somebody really built this. It's just a wrapper. Somebody wrote this library. And this forRoot and forRoot async, there are two versions of this module. forRoot, where you are just passing all the credentials like whatever you have, and forRoot async. This is a dynamic initialization, asynchronous initialization of TypeORM module. You are injecting the config service through the config module, and through the config service you are getting all these variables, the dialect, host, port, username, password and all. Here we can just use the URL and put all those things inside a single Postgres database connection URL. You can pass the entity, synchronize true and false, right? So we can create this a wrapper on top of this dynamic module, right? What we can do is forRoot async, and then there is already we are using is forRoot. forRoot is a method which we are using if we already have all the variables, but obviously we need to depend on some config service to pass those variables, because we won't be having that handy. It will be injected dynamically through some config service, and for that we need to use forRoot async. Okay, so this is the forRoot async. This is sequelize module, and this is sequelize module.forRoot async. That is also when these are like two different variations of initializing the TypeORM module. forRoot async, we have like this forRoot, and at the bottom we have forRoot async, and here you are just passing the name of the connections, factory and inject. So here we are going to inject the config service which we have just built, and if you look at the config service, it has this configuration variable. It is returning me, it is giving me this database, that is giving me the URL object, right? Database URL. So you need to put that in the env, and we should be able to initialize the database module. So okay, this is app config. Now in database we are going to have the same thing, package.json. Here we are dependent on the config module, just config, tsconfig, and inside source we are going to create a db module. Or you can create a db interface. And db service, and inside index.ts export everything from db module, everything from database module. Okay, now we will start adding things inside our database module. This is the database interface. This db config is nothing but having the entities, all the entities as an array, and inside database module I will use the existing code because I have discussed about this code many times, and here we are talking about the baseline. I will be explaining how we are doing the dynamic modules later, but here this is, we are getting all these things from the dev config. This is how we are importing the configurations from the config package which we have created. So these two packages are interdependent. And here we are, what we are doing now, if you look into this code nicely. We have created a custom database module. You can say custom module, which we can execute by calling dbmodule.forRoot. ForRoot is a static method, so I can call dbmodule.forRoot. I can pass this dbconfig. dbconfig contains the entities. Entities is an array of all the TypeORM entities we have. What this module is returning, if you see, it is returning TypeORM module.forRoot async, right? You can see here TypeORM module.forRoot async. This is the same code which we have seen, like how we can do the dynamic initialization of TypeORM module when you are injecting the config modules. The config module has a config service, and all these connection options like the URL we are getting from the config service. So here we are passing config service and dbconfig. dbconfig is the variable, get connection options. Here we are just calling this config service to get the database URL, and then this is the database connection options for the TypeORM module, which we are passing the entities, synchronize true false, and logging true false. Same. If I talk about what all parameters we are passing, I'll just zoom this in. I'll go to the top. So here you can see all these things I can move inside of one single variable URL. Then I'm passing entities, synchronize true and false. Okay, so I mean, we have only the Postgres connection. So this is how we are returning the Postgres connection detail. Type is Postgres, URL is a single database URL. Keep connection alive true. SSL will be unauthorized true. Reject unauthorized true. False if you are using some AWS RDS or from Heroku. For local, it can be SSL false. That's it. So this is our DB module, and here this is how we are exporting. So how would I use this DB module and the config module in my service, right? To use the config module, I need to populate all these values in my application. So I will go to app package JSON, and here I can add these modules. So these modules start with the dev database. For now, let's say, and here dev database, and then there is another package we have, dev config. And now let's see if I build this project, npm run build, what it will do is it is going to build these two dependent packages. You can see nx is waiting for one dependent project task. One before the build completes, it will wait, and then it will build this own projects. Then it is building the first dependent packages on which it is dependent. So here this is the use of this workspace, that you can create a package and can link them and add the dependency without even publishing them. So this is how we are doing. Config and database we have added. I added this because I don't want to write TypeORM module.forRoot async 10 different places on 10 different applications. I will just use the db module.forRoot whenever I wanted to use these connections. So let's say if we want to add this dependency and I wanted to use this, what we will do, source app module. Here I have created many folders just to show the demo. I can just delete this for now. Domain module. So I will create a domain module which specifies the dependencies module, and inside this module we can just import whatever we want. So this is import, then we have providers, then we have controllers if we have any, and then export class domain module. And this domain module you can import in your app module. This is how the packages works, right? The module works. There is a one root module, and you need to import all the sub root modules, like sub modules inside this root module, like domain module, shared modules, core module. All you are going to put in here. And inside this domain module, here you can import your database module. So here I will do is db module. I need to do npm install, so I can get all the dependencies resolved. First of all, it's better if I just do import db module from dev database. So here I can just do is db module dot for. So there are some methods exposed by db module. Okay, why it's not showing? db module dot for root, right? This is the method we have created, and here you can pass the entities. Do we have any entities created? My TypeScript compiler is just like crawling. It's not showing me the options. So here it is taking entities as an options, right? This is how we are going to initialize our database connections, right? This is how we are initializing the TypeORM database module, and then whatever the entities we are going to create, let's say we talk about this simple user. Here we will create a user controller, user service, and inside user service we can inject the repository for the user. So let's say I will create a user entity, user entity.ts. I will create all these in the same folder. User controller, user service, user controller, user service, and then user DTO, user response DTO, what else is left? User module. We are not talking about any other building blocks. We are just talking about the controller, service, modules, and how we are importing and exporting the modules. So DB module is external, and here we can create a simple user entity. So user entity will just create a TypeORM entity, and then we will write the services in simple controller. We will also talk about simple CRUD API, maybe simple get and post, how it really works end to end with this setup. Okay, so let's add the entity. What we need to do is here we are creating a simple entity, and we are going to use simple TypeORM entity, and here we can pass the entity name is users, and then it will be simple class, export class users entity extends the base entity. Let me check if we have NestJS TypeORM added in this package. Okay, so that we need to add. That's why it is not importing all these things for me. So we'll go to this application, npm add NestJS TypeORM, and I think there is a PZ. These packages we need to add into this application. So I can see all of these are added, and I should be able to get everything. Like these annotations will start working. Still TypeScript is a little slow sometimes, so what we will do is I will try to import this type from TypeORM, all these attributes, and then here we are going to have a couple of attributes about user. So we are just writing a simple user cred. Let's say ID, email, and username. I'm not writing a authentication API. Username we don't need to use unique. Length is 255, email, username, and that's fine. And there are some updated at and created at column. So this is simple entity, and what we are going to do, we will just create a simple CRUD operation, simple API controller. Here we are talking about the advanced stuff, so I won't be talking about a very basic thing because it's just an entity, and here we are going to create a simple controller. So I mean just simple APIs, how we create. If we talk about a simple NestJS, here in the fundamentals, what all we do is we create the services, controllers, and all. So if you look into this is how we create a simple controller, right? Get controller, and we define these annotations that will convert into the API routes. So this is API get, put, post, delete. All these you can define. So it's just a simple controller we have created. So I will just copy this inside our controller, user controller. So the annotation is users. This is user controller get, and here we can just say what are we expecting. Find all. It means we just need to call the service. So here we'll be doing constructor injection using we will be doing a dependency injection of the service. So we need to create a service. So if you look into this, what all the other things are, you can create a provider, and there are many ways of creating a provider. Like you just create a simple service, something like this. So here inside our user service, and then you define all your methods like get, put, post, like whatever you are doing. And here we are going to inject the repository because we are using TypeORM. And here we can just define all these methods: async, fetch users, and here we will get the TypeORM repository for accessing the users data. So this is how our simple user service really works. So we will inject the user entity inside the constructor. So this is how we are going to inject the repository. All missing imports. This is users entity, add imports, and then how we access the repository. This is how we access the database. What we will do is simply return await this dot repository user repo dot find, and we are just passing empty. That means we want to return all the users from this. So this service, first we are injecting the repositories inside a service, and then controller is accessing this service by dependency injection. So here we are doing private read only dependency injection of this service, and now this service can be accessed in any of these methods. What we can do is simply return this dot service, this dot user service dot fetch users, and we need to await this because this is a async method. It's going to return promise of user entity, that is an array, right? So what we did is we just created a simple controller, user controller, and APIs. This is the API URL, and we did the constructor injection of the service inside our controller, and then we are calling the service method to get the data. Now what all other things you can add on top of this? I mean, there are many things you can do. If we are using Swagger, you can add the API annotations, API tags and all. So here I can just use API. So for that I need to add a NestJS Swagger. So a couple of packages I need to add for exposing these things to the Swagger. NestJS Swagger I remember, and then Swagger UI Express. Let me think what it was. Swagger UI Express. This was the other package. And so we need a NestJS Swagger, NestJS Swagger UI Express. And we can create a Swagger module. Like Swagger module is something which we need for exposing the API docs to everywhere, right? So I will just use my docs. I will explain what I'm doing, and we are doing these things everywhere. Inside source, I will just add a docs which is using Swagger config. This is user service, Swagger interface, and this is a Swagger .ts. Here we are going to use express basic auth to protect our API docs. npm add Swagger basic auth, and this is the dev config. So this is just creating a simple document, and if you look into the docs how we are using Swagger, then it's the same thing. Let me just see. This is open API, right? Introduction. This is how we are creating a simple document, and this is how we are setting up Swagger. Earlier, before these things came into the picture, exposing the API docs just through the code is really very hard. Now it is very easy. I have talked about this nextjs Swagger module in many videos, won't take much time here. So here we are creating a document and then passing the config app and config to the create document method. Once you get the document, you can just do a Swagger module.setup, pass your app instance and the document, and it will set up this Swagger docs on the UI. Like when you do /docs, you would be able to see the Swagger docs generated for your application, like something like this. So you can do lots of things on top of that. Here we have created a simple Swagger module, and that we need to register in our app module. So this is our main.ts root file where we are creating our application. So here we will create a document, call this create document method from the Swagger, and we will pass the app instance. You can see what it is doing with the app instance. It is passing the same app instance here, Swagger module.create document, app instance, and all the options, and it is setting up this Swagger docs on this docs route. So when you hit a /docs, you should be able to see the API docs for your controllers which you have created. So here I have created a user controller. Here I can use now some of these Swagger stuff. So API tags is users. I'm talking about user specific APIs. So I can just specify, okay, what is my API tag, and lots of things you can do in the controller. I will talk about some of them. Here, if we talk about the NestJS building blocks, what all the things which you need to create a simple API. If let's try to document those and try to understand. For simple API, you need to understand the modules. You need to understand controller, what they do. You need to understand services and the DTOs. With the DTOs, you also need to understand validations, how the validation pipe works in NestJS. And then controllers, how we are defining the routing, dependency injection. And for basic CRUD operation, you just need to understand how NestJS TypeORM works. We are using DB module right now to access the user repository. So if you see here in the domain module, inside user module, we are going to create. There we will be using this TypeORM module.4 feature. I will just use a module because this module will get added in the domain module. So here I will be using imports, adding all my controllers, services, right? Controllers, providers, and here I will add a user controller. Here I will add, here I need to add a TypeORM module because here I'm trying to access the user entity. So you just need to provide for feature, and which entity you are going to access in this module is user entity, and then controller, which is user controller, and here we are talking about the provider, so user service. And an export also, if you want to export this so other modules can use it, we pass user service and then export class user module. So there are other things also. These are just like a building blocks which you need, which is controllers, services, modules, and then this user module will get added inside a domain module. User module you can import. This DB module, here we can pass a user entity, and inside domain module we are accessing this user entity by injecting the repository in the service, right? And inside our controller we can talk about the validation pipes. So controller annotation, we are using the users, and then there is another thing is use pipe. So what happens if you remember how we used to do in the express is we define the express routes, and for validations we were using Joy as a middleware which is validating the payload properties. So similarly there is a validation pipe which does the validations of your payload which is coming from the client. So use pipe, and here you can pass the new validation pipe, and here you can pass the different options what you want to allow. The whitelist is true, and transform, if you want to allow the transformation of the variables which are coming as a query parameter body, all this is allowed. So if you talk about the validation pipe, let's see here what it talks about regarding the validation pipe. I think we will get some validation pipes. Validation evaluate the input data if that is valid. So these are some built-in pipes. Parse in pipe, parse float pipe. From the name it's clear. If you talk about validation pipe, you can define the validation pipe. Let's say, because we need to define the type of your input, if it is a boolean, if it is a string, if it is a number, if it is a custom object which contains the properties of type enum, type array of object, type number, boolean. All these we can do the validation using this validation pipe. What we are doing for that is just you can create your custom pipe, but default implementation you can use this validation pipe. And once you have the pipe, you can just, once the pipe is enabled, it will enforce that this ID, whatever you are passing into to the find one, should be of type number. And it's using parseInt pipes. Let's say if you are passing one as a string, it will convert that string into the number. That is fine. But numbering string is expected, like you can see. If you try to pass ABC, so what ABC cannot be converted into the parseInt, it will throw an error. So it will give us 400 error for that. Okay. What else we can talk about simple validation pipe? I mean, we just create these DTOs. Either you can use a joy for the validation or a class validator. What we generally do is we create these DTOs, and those DTOs we use in our controller methods. Okay, I'm expecting in the body these three properties, so I can just use a validation pipe and create a DTO inside our DTO.ts and use that class name. So it will enforce that name should be of string, age should be of number, breed should be of string. Here you can also enforce other class validator criteria, that is number, is string, is boolean, is UUID. All those things you can add on top of that. So might be it is doing, yes, here you can see. So similarly, like I can just create a simple DTO, user DTO. What this user DTO will do is create user DTO, let's say, that will enforce. Here we need to use class validator and transformer. I think there are two packages which we need to add. Let me see what all packages are. One is class validator and class transformer. Class validator and transformer. So these two packages should be enough. We can also add other packages which are required, which we didn't add. So that is express. Sometimes for the typings we use express. Helmet for security. And I need, okay, UUID also we need, and we can also add the types for UUID. Let's we are fine with these. And then here you can, this DTO can be used at the controller level, because we have registered this validation pipe which will validate based on these DTOs. So here what I'm saying is body should be of that type. So here create user DTO. That means whatever you are passing in the body should follow the DTO validation criteria. What it is saying, it should have email of type string, username of type string, and define email username. I think we are using only these two parameters. Okay, so user controller, you just pass this DTO. This DTO will enforce the validations that, okay, whatever the payload body you are passing, that should follow that criteria. Otherwise it will throw the bad request 404. Sorry, yeah, 40, what is a bad request? 401, 402, 403, 404 is not found. So it will just throw the bad request. So here we are creating this controller. Here also we can add lots of annotations to support which is supported by NestJS, and all these information will be exposed to our API spec, like API bearer auth. What it will allow is, it will allow your APIs to pass the authorization token if this API is like protected. Okay. Similarly, you can just define what is the HTTP status code this API will return, and what is the API created response. So we can do lots of things. I will be creating the DTO for that. User created successfully, import or all missing imports. Similarly, what API consumes, API OK operation. So what this API should do, this is doing a create, right? Let's say it is doing create. Okay, we can have two different methods. One is doing OK, and another method can be which is just creating the user. So here I can say create, which will pass the body. Here we don't need to pass the body because here we are just doing find fetch users, API consumes application JSON, API OK response. So because here what we are doing is we are returning the list of users. So here we need to create a custom response DTO for that. So I will create that, and we'll try to make it nice APIs with proper documentation. API OK response, created response, because this is going to give us 201. It is create. So here we need to create a custom type for it. So what we are doing is we can create a response DTO. Inside response DTO, we can define okay what it is going to return, or we can just use this only, export class, create user response DTO. I mean, name can be anything, and what we need to specify is, because it will get a UUID, ID, email, and then there is a one more thing it will get is email and username. These are the three properties we are adding. API response property, this is custom annotation to expose things to the Swagger. Similarly, here we will use the API property, like okay, this API spec is requiring these properties to be passed. So this API property is email. Here we can add lots of validation is email, which is provided by class validator. API property we can import, that is supported by NestJS Swagger. So here it is username. Example of username is dev, and this is email, test@gmail.com. And both are required. So we can add another required criteria is defined. So value should not be empty or undefined. Okay, required is true. So this is the body DTO which we are passing to our controller, and here we can use this response type. So fetch all is going to return as an array of response. Okay, API. Okay, this is fetch all, find all, right? So here, and this is created response, so it's going to return an object, and here it is going to return an array. So this should be API OK response, and this is an array. So we'll just put that inside an array, because we are going to fetch user fetched successfully, user fetch API, and user created successfully, which is creating a user. And here we are going to pass let's say fetch user. Similarly, we are going to call create user, single user, right? And we are going to pass body. Create user is taking this DTO as an input. So here there is another async method, create user, and this is the DTO. We'll import this DTO, and what we need to do is we are getting the we are getting the payload. So what we can do, return await this dot user repo dot save, and we can just pass the payload. That's enough to save the data in the database table. So we are not talking about simple CRUD. I'm just explaining more about the flow and what all things you needed to create all those things. So user entity, not the array. So this is create, and we are importing this controller in the user module. So everything is imported here, controller, service, user module. We are importing back user module in the domain module. What else we have? We can just start the application domain module, which we are importing in the app module, app controller, main.ts. Let's see if I start the application. We need the .env, right? That is missing, and how we are going to populate this .env in the process.env. So we go to main.ts, and I will use this .env module, and I will put .env in my code base .env, because we need to have database running, some database running. So we also need to have a docker compose file and all those stuff. I will just create a simple docker compose file for now, and env. So let's say this is my env, which looks like this. It is going to talk to simple user API or test API. Okay, it is going to run on 3000, let's say 3010. So main.ts, all the environment variables will be populated here, and here this is how we are starting the application. So here it should be process.env.port, otherwise use 3000 port, or we can get the port also from the config service, which we are importing from the config module. We have lots of unnecessary folders, but that is fine, those are empty. We have docs, domain, here domain module, and we have everything inside a users. So we have controller, DTO, entity, module, and service. I think these all things are enough. What we can do is npm run start dev, and let's see what happens. Is it trying to bootstrap our modules in the same order? Okay, you can see there is an app module initialized, config module initialized. TypeORM module will give error because our database is not up and running. Okay, so here I have introduced Docker Compose and Docker Compose override. I mean, you can put everything inside a Docker Compose YAML also. And here I have Docker Compose override, and I can just do Docker Compose up so that I can have just a single Postgres container. That is in the root. Okay, so it has created this database test API, and that is exposing 32 port. So we will use that same port here in the env of this application 5432, and I will restart my application. Let's cancel this task and npm run start dev. So it should start my application. Let's see. Okay, you can see now I can check the API endpoint also. I think the port is different. The port is 3010 3010. And you can see a simple API docs, right? I think I didn't put the controllers properly. There should be two API endpoints, domain user, user controller. This is first one is the get, and second one should be post, because it is doing create. That's why we are using API created response. Here it is doing simple get status code 200 and returning OK. That's why we are using API OK response. So here you can specify all the expected response status code that this API can return. You can document all those things. So all those things will be exposed in the Swagger also. You can see this API can return 200, and this is the data format. And this API can return an object when you create a user, so username and email, you can see it has created this data in the database, and I can just simply fetch it. I mean that there is no magic, right? This can be done in the Express, same or less number of lines of code, but it's all about modularity and how we are approaching this. And these are the DTOs where all these three properties are required. This is the create user DTO. Right, similarly, you can define all the other API endpoints, put, delete and all. We are not going through that. So this is how you simply define all the some simple basic REST API with the Postgres. And here we are using PNPM workspace and a nnex monorepo tool. We have created database package and the config package. So here we are focused only on the domain module, right? Here we are injecting the TypeORM repositories and then accessing the database through the repositories .find, .save, and here we are doing dependency injection of service inside a controller and putting all these things together inside domain module. So all these things are bundled in the user module. Then user module is exported inside domain module, because there can be user module, some other module, course module, student module, and all these modules will be added in the domain module. Domain module is a subroot module. Then domain module we are importing in the app module. Here you can import all the logger module, domain module, shared module, core module, all the things. So what we have covered in this video, if you talk about the NestJS fundamentals, simple overview, like simple how we are creating a providers, how we are creating a simple module, how we are creating controllers. We haven't created a middleware or exception filters, pipes and all. I mean, if you look into the documentation, it's straightforward how we are creating pipes. We just have used a validation pipe. You can use parseInt pipe if you want to allow, like you can use parseInt pipe for the query parameter where you are expecting numeric query parameter. Then auth guard to protect the API endpoints, exception filters to when you are sending an exception back to the client, you can intercept the exception and you can customize the response status code and all. So that we can do through just a simple exception interceptor. So these all exceptions your APIs can throw, right? Bad request exception. These are the internal exceptions that converts indirectly into a status code, like forbidden, bad request, not found exception, unauthorized exception, and unprocessable entity exception, conflict exception and all. Pipes, guard, interceptors, and custom decorators. We can create a custom decorator also. So by default we use body to accept the payload body, query to accept the query parameters, and request and response to process the request object and extract something out of request. Here mostly we use all these things, params to access the path param. Like this is how we do in Express, request.param, request.body, request.query, request.headers. Same thing we can do in controllers to get these things, extract the headers, extract the query param, path param and body. Like we are using, if you want to extract the user, somehow some mechanism is putting user in the request object, we can use annotation user custom decorator, something like this. And what that decorator will do is it will give you the user object which is there on the request object, and you can access the user object like this inside your controller. This is how we are passing the data. So this is all like simple setup, pre-built setup, and we have added lots of things on top of the basic bare bones structure. We have a Swagger module, database module, config module added, right? And then we just created a simple CRUD operation with the help of TypeORM, NestJS TypeORM we are using. We are doing a payload validation using validation pipe, and we are defining the DTOs, controller services and modules. And this is the module hierarchy. You can also create a shared module, core module, and import all those modules in the app module. Similarly, we have these packages, right? I can create an app logger. That's another package I will talk about, like how we can use the built-in logger package from the NestJS, or how we can create our own custom logger and how we can use that I will talk next. And then I will talk about the custom providers, like what all different ways to do the dependency injection, not just by creating an injectable class. That is the next two videos we are going to work on. Okay, Let's see you in the next video. I mean, lots of things in this video was like already discussed, but I cannot just skip and start using some existing project. I need to explain things because there are different kind of audience. I have mixed audience.